The other thing, and I always refer back to my CSO at the time, Bloomberg, where a very experienced person in the way I told him, listen, man, we're not in a candy store. We could all look around and get nice, big, bright eyes and look, and we could do this, we could do that. Man, the money is on hemoglobinopathy. So we need to focus and execute on that, at least during the early years. And that's what we did.
Hey, Philip here. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Flot.bio show, where I interview the best Europeans in biotech to help you grow. Today, I'm in Zug, just next to Zurich, to talk with Rodger Novak, who is one of the co-founders and the chairman of CRISPR Tx. And Rodger is really one of the few Europeans who made it really big globally in biotech. We had our first chat on stage in 2016, and it's great to be able to talk with him again today. We will talk about bringing the first CRISPR drug to the market, almost there, and why he thinks everything is broken in biotech in Europe except science. So let's head to the meeting room and talk with him. Hi, Rodger. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great to be in Zurich. It's quite hot.
Yeah, I was really excited.
Yeah, how can I? You're so easy. So yeah, I mean, for today, I think there are a lot of topics to cover, or we could cover. But I wanted to start with the CRISPR drugs and bringing the first one to the market. It's I think really close. Supposed to be reviewed, I think December end of this year for one indication, and you have founded the company that is behind it. And I think my question is, how did you manage to go faster than everyone else in this space?
Okay. So the nice answer or the not so nice answer? No, I mean, I think it's a good question maybe to start with. Now, it's 10 years ago. So when we got introduced, or when I got introduced to the CRISPR technology, I think one of the very first things was really the question, how do you translate this? So you have something, really innovative, everybody or almost everybody starts to work on it. Many people get excited, but then the big question is, okay, how do you really make sure that you can translate this into some kind of drug? Yeah. And I think there were 2-3 elements to this, which I think are not only applicable to CRISPR and the story, but maybe in general. So the very first is, we thought, hey, we need to understand the technology relatively well, or at least better than what we read, from academic scientific publications. And once we have understood this a little better, we also understood very quickly where are the advantages at that stage of the technology and where are the disadvantages. Yes. And so we said, okay, we need to make sure that we make use of what this technology is really good at, and everything else, so that we park this, but we don't put an emphasis on that at the beginning. So in the end, keep it simple.
You have an example on that?
Yeah, the example is relatively easy. People were excited in 2 ways. They were excited that you can knock down something by having a double-stranded DNA cut, which then gets repaired. And during that repair, you have some mistakes, and with that, you get your knockdown. And obviously, the other approach is that you insert a DNA template with whatever kind of sequence you're intending to put into the DNA. The second one, even today, 10 years later, is still a challenge for various reasons. And we understood this, and I think others understood this also as well very early on, that the knockdown is easier. But I think what we also did is then we thought more from a translational perspective about how do you make use of this. So we really ignored the insertion part and said, okay, so if we now knock something out, how can we do this? And there's a second problem, which was very clear that time and still is a big challenge for the field, and that was the delivery aspect. So we, at the time in particular, yes, we knew about mRNA delivery and LNPs and AAV and pretty much what we know today. I mean, today I think the field is much more sophisticated, but still the same issues remain. And so we say bottleneck. It's the same bottleneck, yeah. And we can maybe talk about that bottleneck a little bit at one point. But then we also said, hey, so why not taking something outside? So taking something from the patient, from the body, so cells, and manipulate them outside. Yeah. And then again, don't insert anything, just knock down something, and then give it back to the patient, because that's something we understood we can control pretty well.
So ex vivo knockout, vivo, in vivo.
So that was the one extreme, in vivo insertion outside the liver, maybe even more.
Which I think, from what I understand, CRISPR Tx is working on it, but it's still, even today, it's still like super early.
It's super early, and that's something, if you want to talk about CRISPR, and not only CRISPR, DNA editing, maybe RNA editing, that's something we can touch on a little bit, because I think, as I said before, the field has been more sophisticated, but the challenges are still very, very similar than what we have encountered 10 years ago. And so we said, okay, we combine two elements. One is knockdown, and the other thing is ex vivo. And so now then look for an indication. And to be quite honest, if you have these kind of two criteria, I mean, there's not that much left, which then also fits the bill of that you want to say, okay, I want to have a real proof of concept. I want to have something which really addresses an unmet medical need. I want to have something where a market. I put this over here because it sounds a little bit, I would strange, because for sure we are dependent on investors, and in particular at this, always depend on investors, but in particular in the early stage, you have private investors, so you for sure need to also bring them along. But then also how you execute on clinical trials. People forget that. Often forget. They say, we have an orphan indication, we have this, we have that, and so it's easy, but one has to be very careful, because either a field is crowded, even an orphan indication, then it's very difficult to recruit, or you have so few patients, that which are eligible to whatever protocol you have, so it might be an issue. So we said, okay, if all these criteria apply, there are not that many diseases left, and one of them was sickle cell and beta thal. And so,
which also gene therapy companies also work. I mean, like
Bluebird, that was an issue, quote unquote, with the investors, because investors for sure said, can you work on hemoglobinopathy? So sickle cell and beta thal, it will be cured by Bluebird, And so it was, and maybe that was something where other companies at the time, like Intellia, Editas, sure they considered also hemoglobinopathies. But then, maybe they got scared and said, hey, how we can compete against a company and against programs which are 2, 3, maybe 4 years ahead. So we do something different. We want to be differentiated this. And we took a different position. We said, hey, the most important thing is we want to give this technology a chance. And so we need to de-risk it. And we want to do something where, in a field where we still feel there is an unmet medical need, despite the fact that Bluebird's program was further advanced. Today, we know with hindsight that this was probably a very, very, very good decision. And it teaches you a lot of lessons. Yes,
crazy. Because it makes me think about. We watched the interview we had in 2016 on stage in Berlin. And you were saying that you're trying to go a bit slower, but more a bit more conservative, but to win the race at the end and have a more clear trajectory versus trying to sprint and then sprint another.
It's marathon. It's a marathon.
And at the end, when you look 7 years later, it was the right decision, or the right pace.
I think it was the right decision. I also think that I think that's important. And this has not, I think it doesn't only apply to CRISPR. CRISPR maybe is a very special case because of CRISPR editing, because all of a sudden, innovation, I always say this, at least in the early days, all the innovation or most of the innovation was driven by academia. Right. So we could benefit from that. We all could benefit from that. So it's not like if you, let's say, have a great idea and you look for funding and you do some experiments, let's say, in an academic setting, then you transfer it to a tech, to a biotech setting. But often, maybe you work with a modality, which is known, but then, often you're still alone with your ideas and how you make, progress. And then think in the CRISPR cases was different because so many people worked on that. It made it also more complicated for sure, because also one thing, and this is clearly a criticism, is that people, in particular the academic field, very quickly for sure realized that if you want to publish in high-impact journals, you just put CRISPR in the title,
cancer,
and for CRISPR and in vivo, or CRISPR and whatever kind of model, and then here we go, you have your Nature Biotech paper. And like often, unfortunately, myself, I come out of academia, but often many claims also around safety, other aspects which were made through scientific publications. I wouldn't say that they were wrong necessarily, but they were not to the standards we need in this industry, but they caused a lot of confusion with investors, even with regulators. I remember many, many occasions where we had to either ignore it. Yeah, most of the time we tried to ignore it. Often you couldn't ignore it, and then you had to do your own work internally. So it was a very interesting time and a confusing time. But the other thing, and I always refer back to my CSO at the time, Bloomberg, where a very experienced person, where I told him, listen, man, we're not in a candy store. We can all look around and get nice, big, bright eyes and look, and we could do this, we could do that. But man, the money is on hemoglobinopathy. So we need to focus and execute on that, at least during the early years. And that's what we did.
Sounds like, I like that a lot. I mean, I like the fact that makes me think, everything you said, but even from an observer, it was crazy. CRISPR, I think it's the first time I see this, and I think even from reading about biotech history, I don't think this happened very often, where there's so much attention and hype and money, maybe comparable to like the early days of biotech with Genentech and the like biotech factory, and it will like change everything within 10 years, and it took a bit longer. But it's amazing with CRISPR. Even the general public knowing all about CRISPR, and sounds like even for you guys, you were basically, you had like so much possibilities, and then, but that's also what you say. It's very challenging to say no, and really focus.
I think it's a trick, and I think,
and maybe also just connected to also you sounds like you. It's pretty clear that CRISPR was going to work, or there was a huge potential. So
yes,
versus like even mRNA, even Moderna, it was still very questionable if it was really going to work that big. In hindsight, it's possible, but I don't know.
I think yes. mRNA is an interesting one. I think there's another element which. So when the very first time I joined the industry, so the biotech industry was in 2006. With Labiotech Therapeutics, which was in Austria, with a small molecule approach in antibacterials. Comparing that time to what we do today in the industry is very different from a quality perspective. I'm not saying that the companies around that time didn't meet quality criteria, but I think, particularly when it comes to people, so who is working in the industry, whom can you attract, that is different. And I think that was another very, very important point, that from a leadership perspective at CRISPR in the early days. So myself, I have a more of a, I would say, I'm a medic. I've been trained as a scientist for almost 10 years.
You're a professor.
Yeah, I was a professor, blah, blah, blah. But, with that, I always considered myself more as a translational person. So someone who sees a scientific asset and then thinks about how can you bring this into clinical setting. You never can do this, And I think what is important with these startups also at the time, that the leadership, including the CEO, unless for sure the person is able to build a different team, but I would phrase it carefully, or also
Why is the
holding back a little bit. I think it makes a huge difference for really early startups when it's about technology platforms in particular, that the leadership team in particular, also the CEO understands or has a basic understanding about what it means to bring something into the clinic. What are the potential challenges? Almost has a respect for that. Only then the individual can recruit a team really fitting the needs of the assets or the platform. And that's something I've seen repeatedly, maybe also to a certain extent with other CRISPR companies where in the early days this didn't happen. And that's something I think people and investors should really pay attention to. I mean, when you think about the leadership changes in Editas, all the individuals who have been there, qualified people I respect. But when you really look back and look at, was that the really right fit for a startup in a highly competitive environment where you have all the ideas and the dreams about a game-changing technology, but in the end, it has shown nothing but some science, cell, and nature. And so I think that's very important to almost have, the respect for what is about to come, and then be very smart about it and get the right team together.
And I think, makes me think that kind of in the tech world, this experience is overrated. But I think in biotech, it's a very good point. Less overrated, at least than I thought.
I have a view on that. It's a very interesting, and I cannot name or mention names. That would not be correct. But I've been thinking about that question a lot, because I love to support young people, also leadership positions. I think that's absolutely important. And then more recently, in a company where I'm involved, it's also a tech platform. It's stealth, so nobody can do anything. The person, a very smart person, who is, for me, the scientific brain and founder, obviously, behind this, approached me and said, "Hey, I'm going to be the CEO." And I almost fell off my chair. Probably 10 years ago, I would have laughed him out of the room and said, come on, give me a break. But then, I thought about it. And I came exactly to the conclusion you just made. Because he said, in tech, we do this, and you have all these young people. I think experience, even in our industry, is to a certain extent a bit overrated. In particular, when it comes to very senior people out of pharma. I mean, we should be a very dynamic environment, and I think some people probably have a challenge with that. I've been in big pharma, so I know why that is. But at the very same time, and this is because we are, after I think the aviation industry, the most regulated industry. So it's nice to have good ideas and this and that, but you need to do this within a framework.
And even further than legal, and the complexity of bringing a drug to the market is insane. I can even relate, maybe even from like being like a bit younger than you, less experienced, and my recent experience in Switzerland with Molecular Partners. I mean, And even working in biotech, I was like, okay, I can still I was trying to spinning out a therapeutics company. But when I really put my hands on it, so complex. And even to see them inside trying to develop a drug, so complex that, now it taught me this, that basically where is the balance? So
I think it's a balance. It's a balance. And for example, when with CRISPR, maybe briefly back, I brought on board in the early days, I think after 2 years, Sam Kulkarni, who's now the CEO, for a while. And Sam was very young, and he came from McKinsey, very young. For tech, he was already an old man with 36 or 37.
Still 10 years of experience.
Yeah, so he had at least some exposure, but I got a lot of questions from the board, because it was a C-level position, a CBO, should we do this, and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And I thought for sure we do this. I mean, it's not that young anymore, but I think the balance is the right thing to do. Because also I think, in particular, when you come out of pharma and enter the biotech, we can learn from people who have not been in the system, because they come out with other ideas. And in many cases where we develop drugs these days, in particular for rare disease, I mean, it's not in the textbook. Yeah.
That's right. We could talk that. I want to continue on that, especially, I want to continue on this, because I think you are what I love with you is that you have when you started CRISPR Tx, you had this pharma experience, this biotech experience, very entrepreneurial mindset. And I want to get back to that after, on what's the lessons there, or lot of things we can discuss. But going back to the actual CRISPR therapeutic drug, one thing that even I have hard times to really understand is the comparison to Bluebird on the drug. Because at the end, CRISPR, it's clear that it has changed everything in academic, in agtech, even in discovery and tools.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to actual gene therapy, I'm always wondering how much is it a game changer, how much improvement, and how important is the tool in the whole gene therapy approach versus a talent that is maybe a bit more expensive, maybe a bit more complicated, but from my understanding, once it's done, maybe it can do the job. But can you elaborate a bit on that? For me or some similar people in the audience, and I guess you got some clinical results as well to back that up.
I think when you look at CRISPR as a technology, you probably have to divide this into different pillars. One pillar is, more, I would almost say, as a tool in the academic world, but not only academic world, also in the CRO world, where you, for example, use the editing to design whatever kind of animal model, whatever suits you.
And by CRISPR is extremely fast and cheap.
Yeah, or antibody production with cell lines. You can do a lot of stuff there. What maybe for the purpose of this, I think, thinking about CRISPR as a therapeutic. I think when you look at this, what we have done so far, and the field has done so far, is mostly a focus on a combination of cell therapy with CRISPR technology, marrying this. So we take an HSC, so a hematopoietic stem cell, and edit that. And then the edited cell is your therapeutic. When you think about immuno-oncology, for example, same thing. You, for example, take a T cell, you design, whatever kind of feature you would like to have with regard to a TCR or whatever surface antigen, you name it, or you do mutations, in the T cell to prevent exhaustion. So many things. All that is very easily doable, at least at the bench with the CRISPR technology. You can, again, also reuse it for sure in the company as a tool to run our models. But then once we understand what kind of edits we have to do, for example, to have quote unquote, the very best T cell for, let's say, an immuno-oncology indication, then it becomes part of a product. So I think, and when you mention talents or even zinc fingers, from a single knockdown or, let's say, editing perspective, yes, they are. From a therapeutic perspective, there are indications where you absolutely could use a zinc finger or a talent. But I would call this the flexibility, the speed. Also, by now, we understand much better, from my perspective, preciseness of doing something.
So offside.
Offside, but not, that's a very complicated matter, and I think some people would disagree with that. We don't have enough data anymore with talents and zinc finger to really come to a conclusion. But I think more that like think about small molecules. When you work on small molecules, you want to compare lots of leads, for example, or chemical matters for a given pharmacological effect. The more you have, the more SAR you can do, the better for you. The better is it in the end to find the one molecule. The same thing is with editing. If you, in your research, have a tool in your hands where you can edit different sites, look for whatever kind of effect, biological effect, whatever it is, read out assays you have, and then pick, in this case, the right guide to do this, it's for sure has huge advantages over not being able to do that and rely on one or two maybe cuts or approaches. So I think this is one of the huge strengths of the technology.
But that's still more in the discovery phase, because once you're in a phase one,
sure, this is only to in the end identify your best product.
But my question then, that's makes total sense. But where I'm still not clear is then once the product is identified, Robert has the product, and you go into the similar.
They're two different products. They're very different. So we have an editing product where we edit a promoter site, which leads to the upregulation of fetal hemoglobin. So and Robert does is kind of replacing a genetic default to overcome the genetic defect.
Okay.
Technically, this is very different, and there are differences with regard to, and here you talked before about complexity. Complexity comes in. Manufacture. So, to manufacture what we do is totally straightforward, but significantly more straightforward than, for example, what Bluebird does.
Because they also both are ex vivo.
Yeah.
They also.
Yeah. So I mean, the processes are very, very different.
Okay.
And so in the end, and then also, I mean, how to put this best? I mean, the reason why we went after the same indication Bluebird went after were different than they are today. At the time, we thought, we may be safer, we can produce faster, we have less variability, and these were the reasons we believed in. And tried to convince the investors that this is relevant for all the reasons it might have been relevant to justify to go after what some people call the Me Too. Today, it is totally differentiated, but for other reasons. And so it's also a lesson learned, if you ask me, is that if you really believe in your product, even if another company is way ahead of you, and you think you can differentiate, go for it.
Yes, you can be, let's say, best in class, or
yes, exactly,
better at the end. Yeah.
Best in class, or it has to be best in class, or at least getting close to that. You need to be able to differentiate.
Yeah.
But shying away just because someone is ahead of you, in particular, if you think you maybe have better target validation or whatever you do, I mean, think about it. I mean, there are always reasons why you still could do it, but you obviously need to have a rationale for it.
I mean, even just the answer to that question, it shows also the complexity behind. I mean, our discussion on complexity, and it's crazy how complex it is, and how then you have to really boil down to really see like the differences.
Yes, but I think it's another thing. People tend to overthink.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think even that you have to keep it simple, and you have to believe in something. Yeah. I mean, don't believe it. So that's another thing. Once you have made a decision for a key decision, let's say you go for an indication as a company, you talk to your colleagues, you're really convinced as a team, defend it, fight for it, but then also stick with it. Yeah. But you need to
work with it as long as possible until you're really wrong.
I would caveat this a little bit. Make sure that you qualify whatever you want to do as soon as possible, and you don't keep something alive for the wrong. So, I mean, everybody knows in the industry, it's not about killing it early. That I don't like this, because all these drugs, also our CRISPR drug died easily 10 times. They all die many deaths. But then again, experience tells you, can you overcome that death? Can you revive it, in one way or the other? And is it worth it? And so that is, by the way, a complexity, I think, where, again, it comes back to the earlier point I made. If you don't have a leadership, a CEO who can really also understand this and drive it, then how can that CEO who doesn't understand it stand in front of the board and say, listen, I mean, I respect you, whatever, but this is what I believe. And so I think the benefit is it's an extremely important point that particularly when it's around these complex platforms, that you have a senior team in place who understands what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. You could talk more about team. I think what you just said, I think I think the more complex something is, or even a project is, the more you need like robust team, and that's some experience that even if you take the parallel, I mean, launching a rocket, SpaceX, you need building.
They're not jokers.
Building a nuclear power plant or whatever. Whatever that, when you have a budget of $1 billion.
Yeah. But maybe SpaceX is a nice example. No, it's a tech example. Yeah. You have, obviously, in that case, with all respect to Elon Musk, a crazy guy with a crazy idea, but he's not building the rockets. Yeah. So when you look at the team, at the senior leadership, this is an A+ team.
Yeah.
I mean, and so there's a combination of dreams, of vision, innovation, backed by professionals. And that for me is an equation which helps you, which you require for success, for breakthrough success. Depends again how you define success. Yeah, but I think this is critically important. Yeah,
I like it. So talking about this and going back to the story of to more less experienced founders that you help, or executives, do you recommend them sometimes to go after something a bit less ambitious, or moonshots, and something a bit more a bit safer, less complex?
Not necessarily. So first of all, moonshots, I'm not a big fan of moonshots, because because who was it? I think the Indian or the Chinese, I don't know. Someone failed right now with the landing on the moon. Anyway, no, seriously, no, I do not think so. I think we need these ideas. We need also ideas where you think totally out of the box, and where personally I even think sometimes and often they come from people who have no exposure to the industry. Yeah. So, and the founder, I mean, I heard this many times also, when we did CRISPR, a founder is often not the right CEO. That very much depends. But why I am a little skeptical, and that's something maybe, I don't know if it fits the bill or the subject matter, is a difference between Europe and the US. What I have seen in Europe, not always, but there is a tendency, I would say, that academic founders, which some of them obviously very good and very interesting ideas, very much misinterpret or underestimate the challenges ahead of them, because there's one thing, for example, not only about drug development, we talked about this, there's another thing. And it also relates a little back to CRISPR. So you're not a young guy, young lady, young man, whatever, and we say, okay, I want to build a company. The problem is you need good people, because you yourself, you don't know. So how do you convince people to join you? How do you make sure that people believe you, that you are the person who can lead that effort when you want to recruit the very best? It's not possible. So why would I join someone where that person claims leadership? And I right away understand, okay, he's a very talented person, and it's nice for the ego and whatever it is to become the boss. But why would I deal with this if I have so many other opportunities? Because, there are alternatives, unless that person, and that's then the difference, and maybe that's a little bit of an advice, understands quickly that being the leader is primarily being also a team member. And that what I see in Europe often not at. And in the US it's easier. Often academic founders, really commission than professionals to do a bit. And with that's a little bit easier. I
like that. Yeah, it's a good transition to the differences with Europe, and we can talk about the people. But I think people makes
it's a key.
It's key.
It's everything.
It's key. It's key. I think. So you sent me an email, I think 6 months or so, a few months ago, and you told me everything is wrong in bio in Europe besides science. We can talk about it if you want.
Hey, I was very yeah, that's probably another search where I said, oh my God. Yeah, you want to talk about it? Yeah. Okay, I live in Europe, so I have to be careful now. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a little frustrating. That CRISPR is a Swiss-based company, but
she's here in Zug.
In Zug, yes, here, yeah. But for sure, it's almost exclusively when it comes to operations, US based,
So people,
we have people at Switzerland, but from an operational perspective, we have our board meetings here. Key decisions are taken in Switzerland. IP is all that. That just is important. But operations are in Boston or at the West. That's their mission. Now, and on the one hand, when you think about recruiting, for example, at the Boston area, it's crazy because people are super expensive. Right now we have a different market, but during the times where biotech was booming a bit more, let's say 2 years ago, we also had issues to get really qualified people, even for a company like CRISPR or other really established biotech companies, simply because people could pick and choose. But you have a market. You have very qualified people sitting in the US. They're not all Americans. Many of them are Europeans working. In Europe, it's different. We have a number of challenges from my perspective, or my experience. Let's start with the positive thing. I think science in Europe is strong.
I saw CRISPR, Emmanuel.
That's clearly a European story. For sure we have with Jennifer and others, we have, I mean, science is international. We have a US-American aspect, but probably a little less the way the Americans look at this. So I consider this, at least the early days, as a European science story. Many other things have been done in Europe. Now, the problem is number one problem is, how do you get this science translated into not only a drug, that's one thing as a job for a company, but more so, how do you sensitize, I think the right word, people, academics, to think about, hey, can I build a company? That is missing. We miss this a lot. It's getting better. It's missing. But these are not the big issues. I come to the big issues a little later. The next thing is, you need to...
How long is the list?
The list is long. I try to make it shorter. The next things for sure,
the one was
the entrepreneurial mind theory is very different. And it's in many ways naive, which, by the way, is not a bad thing, because what we experience in the US is not very nice, because the very first, I always say, a US founder always wants to see the cap table first. A European founder, in 80% of the cases, doesn't even know what the cap table is.
Yeah. So I know what it is.
Yeah, because what is it? Now, and I like the European approach much more, not because then we can take advantage of the naivety, not at all.
Because you focus on the science.
But you focus on the assets, you focus on the science. But the entrepreneurial mind is different. Also, a respect for what we do and what we in this industry is very different. I think maybe less than 10, 15 years ago, but I was still in academia, where it was considered, you were considered a failure if you entered the industry. Yeah. And I think this mindset is still there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Yeah. But then coming back to the very early subject, we had team and people to find European leadership, CEOs in particular, but also chief business officers, is hard. It's very, very hard. Not that we don't have them. Many of them are in the US. And we do have some, but we can probably, I wouldn't say count them on one hand, but maybe 2.5 hands, I don't know, are sufficient when it comes not to startups. I mean, this is again a slightly different game, but when it comes to people with real experience,
other Rodgers, like the...
No, yeah, but
so to say, having a little,
my background, academic background, medical doctor, but many years in biotech, pharma, two NASDAQ listed companies, you name it, yeah. Long time, or a lot of experience with investors, be it bankers, be it VCs, you name it. In the US, you find, let's put it on the table, you find a lot of Rodgers, a lot of there. In Europe, yes, we have them, not that many. And that's a challenge. Yeah, because we need them. We need these people. Yeah, and not at my stage, or at the stage of my career, or end of my career, or whatever we want to put this, yeah. But at least some of that, where we can really help these companies move on, because we have another challenge in Europe, and we can't change that. We don't have a NASDAQ. And so that's a tricky thing, because in the end, we always have to focus at one point to the US, different models to do that. But actually IPOing a company is one of the key exits for investors. Yes, you have M&A and all that, but I don't know what the numbers are, but I do believe that an IPO right now is a bit more tricky, obviously, but it will come back, is one of the key exits, which also, again, attracts, obviously, investors when they see an opportunity. And if you are on a continent which doesn't allow you, for sure, you can go on local exchange, what is the right word? Stock market, sorry, yeah. But in most instances, at least for the biotech industry, be some exceptions, but mostly you have to be listed at NASDAQ.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you need to have a presence there. You need to not just fly over sometimes and meet some bankers or analysts. You need to have some center of gravitas, which then moves attention away from your European side. So it's doable, but it makes it more,
Always surprising. Yeah, it always surprised me the stock market in Europe, but even for biotech, there's just not a more European stock market. It's crazy. But I mean, that's that. But everything you mentioned also, then it's like, I mean, it's really on the structural level, on the top level. I mean, obviously you will not change that, but how to really change these things.
I don't know. I mean, it's. I mean, obviously, stock exchange. That was a word. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's super hard, and I don't know. I think it's almost impossible. But when we look at our industry, not only biotech industry, European industry, for sure there are pockets where we have tech industry and all that. But I do think we do have a different mentality. It's not bad. I think our mentality is different, but it's certainly also in other areas much less entrepreneurial. And as that over time, that's almost prohibitive when we think about what is the future? How do we manage this? How do we encourage people to take their life and their responsibility in their own hands and not be too afraid of the risk? Because for sure there's risk. It's an economic risk.
I think, you're talking quite a lot on the also kind of macro society level across countries. Maybe if you look at it more from a micro level, let's say whatever, founder or CEO is 35, 40 based in Europe, what can he or she do about it? Because I think that's also, basically a very stoic way of seeing it, what's in my control, what's not in my control, and just I do what is in my control. Same as you when you started CRISPR, you and Sean and Emmanuel, but when you started CRISPR Therapeutics, you realized early on Switzerland is not enough. Let's go to Boston, IPO directly on NASDAQ. You never IPO'd on the European market. I think, if I'm sure.
Yeah, that's correct.
Most of the team, they are Europeans, but they are all US-based Europeans. I mean, there were decisions that were basically in your control.
Yes.
And a European founder CEO could go after the same decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I'm curious how you, is there something more there you would see, giving that understanding the macro, and then how can you apply to you or whoever is listening, let's say a founder, a CEO, or even an investor, how can they apply their macro understanding to a micro, what's in their control decision?
Difficult.
Because that's actionable.
Yeah. I mean, my view is maybe an example. I work as a venture partner for SR1, which is a US VC group, obviously from the past, from GSK, but they're independent now. They're raised now. They're very successful. I think they're the second fund, and they have a European presence in the UK. And I always, when you look at, when you look how they look at European companies, startup companies, I often have the impression they look at them differently as if they looked at the US. And so an actual item, for example, for investors, just take investors, is, can they trust these guys? Trust also the younger people, encourage them, don't have different kind of perspectives just because it's a European team. Yeah, things like that. But in the end, it comes down to ourselves as Europeans. And one thing is, from my perspective, very, very clear. We need to be a bit more brave. We need to accept that failure is part of the journey. And also understand that it's not about you. yeah, you could argue Americans are, they think it's about them, but they're smart enough to understand, I can only win at a team. Yeah, I'm not saying they're necessarily better team players, but I think that there is more tradition to this to understand, hey, I cannot do this alone. Yeah, and with that, I think the system is a bit more,
What I like, for example, if I look at myself, what I quite like is, I would basically agree with everything you said, and it comes from whatever. I lived a bit in Boston and working, but for me, what I like is once I have this like macro understanding, then translating it at a micro level. And what I mean, for example, at a micro level, I will work only with Europeans based in Europe who have understood this.
Mm-hmm.
For example, or like most. And so, it's not, but usually it is the case. And so, for example, a French who doesn't speak English, I will never work with him. Like very, very rarely. A German who doesn't speak English, because if you don't even work in English,
yeah, sure.
For example, but you can already filter out like a lot of people actually.
Yeah,
and a lot of people who are not this the best fit, and it's not the best fit for me as well.
Yeah,
maybe they're good fit for others, or like I tried when I was trying looking for like academic co-founder before going to my career partners, and I talked to like 16 of them. 15 of them, after 2 minutes, I wanted to stop the conversation.
Yeah, they only talk about themselves, no? No, that's my experience.
Themselves, and they had like zero understanding of what like company building was even about. What was like zero, not even like, being experts. They're not.
That from my perspective, one of the key issues we have in Europe. The people really, I shouldn't say the people, because there are always exceptions and fantastic people. But if you look at the majority, and I'm talking, maybe that's too much, 90% on the academics. I have to say that with all respect, sitting in the ivory tower, they have no respect. And have no respect for what is outside, and that they're, I joined just recently, last year, end of last year, the Nobel Prize ceremony with Emmanuel and a special guest. So I had the privilege to be pretty much at all festivities, events, you name it. After a week, I said, oh man, it was once in a lifetime experience for sure, meeting the king, da-da-dee, But then, I said, wow, these people only talk about themselves. For example, CRISPR, which was probably a pretty special Nobel Prize because it was given early. It was given to two ladies. And it was actually already translated into something, which was, by the way, the purpose of Nobel, which, creates a value for the society. So not a freaking single word about this. I was just sitting there. I was thinking sometimes, you're all probably bright people, but your horizon stops very close to your nose, to the tip of your nose, or at the tip of your nose. And it was very enjoyable. Yeah, it's not that, but they should open up, because we could help. We could need their help. When I talk, and Emmanuel will forgive me for that. Hopefully, when I talk to Emmanuel about what we do at CRISPR, what can you do with the CRISPR technology? Let's say in immunology or whatever it is. It's not a lot. I'm not even talking about Jennifer Doudna, who stands up at the Nobel Prize ceremony and says we need to do more with CRISPR because so far very little has happened. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? And what are you talking about? And I think in particular in European academia, the respect and the understanding of the relevance, even from a scientific perspective, of this industry is almost not existing. And that's a huge issue, because without the innovation out of academia, at least in the startup phase, we are lost. Yeah. And I have a lot of examples with academic funds where, similar to your experience, where I say today, now having seen a few, I'm not working with that, period.
Yeah.
I need to be 5 minutes in a room, or let's say half an hour. It's very clear because they only consider their science. They often don't even know the science in a broader perspective. They think this is a way to get wealthy. This is not the way to get wealthy. This is a way to have an impact and to change something, with respect to the benefit.
And to use the science.
Yeah, if you want to get wealthy or famous, well, then do something else. Go on a sitcom. Yeah, I mean, this is crazy. Yeah, and so that's something that is a totally wrong perspective about this industry among many, many European academics. And I find this is a pity. It's a real pity.
I hope academics are watching us can learn from it. No, but coming back to what you just said as well, like, I mean, you understand it on the macro level, but what can you do on the micro level? It's a bit like harder, but on the micro level, even for you, you know rapidly what kind of scientists you want to work with, and you will just...
You can build companies, by the way. Yeah. So we are doing this right now. 2, I think, are in the building. We might even
in that building.
No, in the building, not in this one. In the building, in this like a nylon somewhere. To be honest, exactly. No, not in this building. So we are currently building that, and I think it's absolutely doable. But it's harder. It's more difficult, and and then that does have to do for sure. Not only, I mean, we cannot blame everything academia in Europe, but it has to do with the mindset, which is not only, and this is important. I mean, if an academic founder has a, let's say, bit different mindset, fine, okay. That is not prohibitive for building a company. It just makes it more annoying. What is a problem that many of the ideas we see never go anywhere because of whatever kind of attitude. What is, I think, more difficult is in Europe is that it's not only academia which has this. It's also us as Europeans. We do not respect entrepreneurship the way Americans respect it, and so even at the level of, for sure, we get good scientists. I mean, we have no issues to get good scientists in Europe, But still, you want to have also people who might interact at the more senior level with the investors. This is more difficult. And the reason why it's more difficult, you have less people who have done it. And there are less people simply also in the pool because it's not viewed necessarily as, oh, wow, this is something you should do. I have a super nice example. About 10 years ago, still longer now, 12 years ago, I had a birthday party. And a very good friend comes to me. And he says, Rodger, I need to talk to you. And I said, sure. No, already having some beers. So no, it was good. Yeah, but he said, what's up? He said, you know what? I don't understand what you're doing. I was at that time, I was at Sanofi. You're not a manager. Yeah, you are an MD. Why don't you work? He is an MD. Why don't you work as a medical doctor? You should not be in this industry. So I don't understand it, And so I found this a little strange, it was a job, But then when I left, say Sanofi, I was a global head anti-infectives, so a very secure, nice position, and started with CRISPR. I would say 90%. If people cared, most people anyway don't care. That's fine. 90% who thought they care or thought they have to comment told me, "Nuts? What are you doing?" I mean, and yeah, it's probably a justified question, but in the US, I wouldn't get that question. People would say, "Oh my God, how did you come across that?
How can I invest?"
Yeah. And we say, are you crazy? Why do you do this? You can't do this. Oh my God, you have this nice company car, you have you have your shares, you have this, and you live in middle of Paris in the Marais, the company pays you the apartment. I mean, you're almost God. So why do you do this? What? And in the US, people tell you, oh my God, what a great opportunity. Oh, it's fantastic. Tell me about it. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's a big difference.
Different. Yeah. Yes. At the end, I think you don't regret the decision.
I don't know. I don't regret the decision, but I think it's sometimes, even at a personal level, it's sometimes difficult because I live in Europe now. I have a twin brother, identical twin, and smart cookie. And he decided to, have a career in big corporate. So he was at a big international insurance. I would clearly say that my brother, who's my twin brother, identical twin, who's pretty close to me, does not understand what I'm doing. Yeah. And he's just an example, although he's close to me. I have a lot of friends or people I know really well in the US who know what I'm doing, and not only out of the industry, who have a curiosity to understand what this is. In Europe, oh, the guy made some money. That's not. Yeah. Oh, maybe, he has 2 apartments. That's a lot. Yeah. I mean, you have to, in Europe, you have to justify yourself. You have to justify yourself for what you did, and in particular, if you have been successful. Yeah. And I think going back to our subject matter, when you think about being an entrepreneur, that's totally prohibitive, because for sure, entrepreneurship has to do with risk. It has to do with independence. It has to do also with innovation. And all these aspects. And I don't think that, I think that many Europeans do not really understand and how important it is for our society.
Yeah. What I like in your example is, you cannot, and that's also what makes us European. I mean, your family is European, or some people close, and that's how it's not that much in your control. Versus, your friend group is more in your control. But
yes.
Even for me, honestly, my dad, it took him a long time to understand what I was doing at the Biotech. Oh, okay. Well, do something in that. But at some point, okay, it's working, we're profitable, 10 employees. Oh, okay.
Okay, it's good. Yeah, at least secure. There's a job.
Even now, it's like, okay.
I don't have a specialization in medicine, so I don't have what we call in German Facharzt, because I went into the industry, and my parents, until still way into the CRISPR story, asked me, when do you finish that, It's crazy, or another example, and I think it does fit, for sure. It's not tech. I have a cousin. He's much younger than me. And he has probably some boring job. I'm not exactly sure what he does, but also something with an insurance company. And all of a sudden, I see on Insta that he has a food truck. So he now, I think it's part-time, has a food truck. So I right away text him, WhatsApp him and say, hey, cool, that's great, whatever. And others say, oh, how is he doing? Can you make some money with that? And I'm thinking, hey, that is Europe. It's always someone does something a little different. That's weird, Is it really? That makes sense? And I think we should be more open. And then if we do something, we should also push for it and be serious about it. We are not playing around. You're not playing around with your company. I'm not playing around with my company. We are dead serious. But we do it in a different context, and I think we deserve. Not that I look for respect, I couldn't care less, to be quite honest, but I think this deserves respect. And you don't get it because people, in most instances, haven't had the exposure. And so that I think is, if you think about Europe, US, biotech, investors, NASDAQ, no NASDAQ, that's one of our issues.
No, it's a good one. On the positive side, I think it's changing, and actually, I'm positively surprised by how rapidly it's changing.
Changes.
In the last 10 years, and And I feel like there's a lot of variation between the countries. When it comes to them in the UK, they're definitely like ahead. In some, like Berlin is the figure.
And I think the pure tech thing is also better.
And tech,
I think I see this, because I get now often approached because of AI.
Yeah.
I'm totally clueless, I'm thinking I totally believe that AI will have also our industry huge impact. I just don't know how, and I particularly don't know who. Yeah, because I just don't fully get it, or don't get it at all. But I think our industry in particular is, and we have another problem. We have one problem, that's economic.
We have 5 minutes left.
Okay, you can count this all out, but that's an important. It's about economics. Yeah, our industry, even the biotech industry, has a bad reputation, a particular bad reputation in Europe. Because, and I think for some good reasons, the behavior of pharma, the communication style of pharma, I think also that's getting a little better. But man, if I wouldn't be in that industry, I wouldn't like it either, to be quite honest. And once people understand, you work on drugs, you're pharma. But we're not pharma. Yeah. And that's something also maybe us as representatives of the industry, biotech industry, need to educate. We're not. Yeah.
That's a good one. I think we can finish on this. Yeah, thanks a lot, Rodger, for joining in.
Yeah.
Basically, I mean, we could talk longer and longer. Maybe if people want to follow you, to know more about you on some social media.
Not really. I'm not
Instagram.
I stay away from this now. No, I don't do anything on social media. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn.
I think. Sometimes I update it. Sometimes. But yeah,
they can wait for. I mean, you're talking publicly from time to time. You did Hello Tomorrow. You were on the. Actually, I forgot to mention on the Biotech Between the Biotech Waves podcast with Sean.
Nessam Birmingham.
Nessam. And actually, it's a great episode. And for people who want to know the backstory, the behind the story for the early days. And also, you came twice to Labiotech Refresh, and once 2016, once 2019, 20. Also great background. So for the ones listening who wants to go deeper from that episode, you can. I will link all the. I will put all the links in the description.
So now I need to leave Europe,
No, you need to help. Yeah, I think. On the positive side, I think. You showed that it was. You showed that it was possible to bring amazing science, and right now you are also explaining what's wrong. Now people can work on it, and you're also supporting European funds, entrepreneurs.
Yes, sure.
You're board members, so I think, it sounds maybe a bit negative to describe the problem, but I think what I like is that you're really doing something about it, and you're helping others do something about it, and that's
one of the reasons I came back from the US was because of European culture. And what I really refer to is the entrepreneurs, in particular in maybe an industry which is not well understood. That's, from my perspective, a problem. And then also academia, but academia, I think the general aspect of academia, it's the same. US, Europe, this kind of, I call this to a certain extent arrogancy, but then the US Americans again are more entrepreneurial. In that case, probably more driven by economics and cap tables, which I don't like so much. And the Europeans less so also because they know less. They know less about that system. And so that's something I think with education and good examples and time. Yeah, sure. So it's much better today than obviously 10 years ago. But I just said recently an experience with.
That's when you send me the
probably. That's no mind. Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Rodger.
Okay, thank you.
Me again. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and thanks a lot for listening to the end. If you're keen, please hit the follow button somewhere maybe, or the like, review, share button, share it with some connections. It would help us a lot, especially this early in the show. And before telling you more what's behind the show, I want to say big kudos and thanks to the team. Kieran, web development, Catherine in marketing, Mary in logistics, Wayne in editing. They did an amazing job, and there's a lot of hard work put into the show. So now, what's behind? So Flot.bio, the company was founded in March 2022. I'm one of the founder, and previously I founded Labiotech.eu. And we started the company building a marketplace for the biotech industry, but we didn't have enough product market fit. So we decided to pivot to a content business, with the first product being the podcast. We don't want to create, yet another podcast. There's already a lot of them around. But we believe Europe needs a high quality, long form podcast to help both professionals and biotech enthusiasts be better informed, grow, and just be better at what they're doing. And so that's why we are creating that podcast. We are selecting the best Europeans in biotech we can find, and we are interviewing mostly actually offline, so we can have really the highest quality, both technical aspect, but most importantly on the dance and the content and the flow of the internet content. We release around one episode per month on all the major platforms. Money-wise, we are financed by our own private investments, and our business model is based on advertisement. So it's the sponsored messages, slots that you see in each episode. And we are sponsored by financial support for individuals and corporate. So anyway, I will not make it longer. I hope you share our vision, and if you're keen to hear more, or you want to reach out, or you want to share some feedback, please shoot us an email, hi@flot.bio. Again, thanks for listening, and see you in the next episode. Bye.